B Network remembers with Bob Costas, the West Coast.
Major League Baseball came to the West Coast in 1958. And since then, the San Francisco Giants and the Los Angeles Dodgers have been among the most colorful franchises in the game. Tonight, we'll look back at 3 California stories that are part of baseball history. One involves Dodger Hall of Famer Don Drysdale and his connection to the late Senator Robert Kennedy. Another is what happened that bizarre August day in 1965 when the Giants' Juan Marichal attacked the Dodgers' John Roseboro with a bat. But we begin with a night at the LA Coliseum more than a half-century ago. At the time, it drew the largest crowd to ever see a baseball game. Why they were there is where the story begins.
Sea of lights at the Coliseum, perhaps the most beautiful and dramatic moment in the history of sport.
50 years ago this month, an extraordinary event took place at the Coliseum in Los Angeles.
Slowly, the entire ballpark lighting up with individual lights.
93,000 people came to a baseball game that didn't count to honor a player who most of the city's fans had never seen play.
On his last trip to the mound, the city of Los Angeles says hello to him. Listen.
Somehow, that fandom in California caught the spirit of Roy Campanella, even though they didn't see him play. That is a remarkable thing in sports. I don't know of anything that's comparable to that.
I was 19 years old, went with my dad. I was in college. The feeling was electric. Everybody wanted to help. If they had charged triple, that game would have sold out.
On May 7th, 1959, the Yankees played the Dodgers in an exhibition game. All the proceeds went toward the medical expenses of Roy Campanella, the beloved Dodger catcher, who 18 months earlier had been paralyzed from the waist down in an automobile accident. Just a few years earlier, Campy had been among baseball's biggest stars.
Bulky catcher Roy Campanella, a 300 hitter for the major part of the season, looms as one of the game's better backstops.
Roy Campanella was the catcher for one of the most glamorous teams in history, the Brooklyn Dodgers. He was an all-star 8 straight seasons, from 1949 through 1956. He played on 5 pennant-winning teams, including the World Series champions of 1955, who defeated the Yankees. Campy won 3 MVPs in a 5-year stretch, and in 1953, he hit 40 home runs as a catcher, a record that lasted for 43 years.
And with 2 out, Campanella blasts a home run, and Brooklyn leads 2-0.
Like most players of his generation, Campanella had to work in the off-season. He owned a business in Harlem, and it was there, late on a cold, slippery January night in 1958, that Campy locked up and started driving home to Long Island.
I can never forget that day. I was driving in my car, and I heard that Roy Campanella had gotten an accident.
I happened to be the first teammate to see Roy after the accident. I walked into the room, and here's Campy face down in this. It wasn't a bed, actually. It was an apparatus he could be held in because his neck was broken. And somehow he looked sideways at me, and I got down and looked closely. We made eye contact. When we did that, we couldn't speak.
But I felt so bad for him, I cried. To see this powerful guy, strong, played the game every day, never hurt. And then to see him in a wheelchair like that.
He couldn't dress himself. He could hardly feed himself. Roy told me the hardest thing for me is when I wake up in the morning, because I cannot move until someone comes, puts me in my chair. Then he began to talk to me about his recovery. You know, tomorrow, he said, I go to therapy. They're going to have me pick up 5 pounds with my right hand. I'm looking at Roy and I'm saying, this guy threw out so many runners, this hand along with the other, he had so many home runs, and he's excited about this step to recovery. He's going to lift 5 pounds. That was Campy's makeup.
He said this to me. If God was to say to me, you're going to have to lose some part of your body, which one would it be, Roy? And he said, I would tell God my legs. He said, I wouldn't say my eyes. I wouldn't say my mouth. I wouldn't say my arms. But he said I'd say my legs.
Roy, you're looking pretty good. How do you feel?
Well, I feel as good as I look. I think I've come a long ways. Sure, it's true I can't walk, but I think I can make it without doing that even.
Campanella's attitude was one thing, but as the months went on, his medical bills became enormous. The Dodgers were in Los Angeles by then, and the organization came up with a fundraising idea. An idea that today sounds unthinkable. The Yankees and the Dodgers would play an exhibition game during the season. And on May 7th, 1959, that game took place. The crowd was 93,103, the largest crowd in baseball history at that time.
And the anticipation of seeing Roy had us all buzzing, waiting for that event.
Before the game, Roy Campanella addressed the fans.
I want to thank each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart. This is something that I'll never forget as long as I live.
When the 5th inning ended, there was one more tribute. Here's how Vin Scully described what happened next.
For right now, the Coliseum, all of the lights will be turned out as Pee Wee Reese wheels the chair that holds Roy Campanella towards the pitcher's mound.
We were overwhelmed. We all had our hearts in our throats. And I remember tears coming down my face.
93,000 people are asked in silent tribute to light a match to Roy Campanella.
When they turned the lights off and everybody lit candles, it was absolutely one of the most emotional, unforgettable moments of my life.
The lights now are starting to come out like thousands and thousands of fireflies.
The lighting around Roy and the outpouring of affection to a player who they never got to see play on their own diamond. That was amazing. It was like every individual had a way of communicating their feeling to Roy that night.
Let there be a prayer for every light. And wherever you are, maybe you in silent tribute to Campanella can also say a prayer for his well-being.
I had no idea in the world that many sparkles could be in the dark, and it was beautiful.
That night most definitely impacted his life in terms of his recovery. When he was in the hospital going through rehab, there were many times where he lost the will to live. And to come out and to see 93,000 people have a tribute like that, it renewed his zest for life at that time, and it showed him that he still had a place in baseball.
10 years later, Campanella's place in baseball was Cooperstown.
I always believe that any professional athlete, to be good, you have to have a little boy in you.
In the early 80s, Tommy Lasorda made Campy a coach for the Dodgers, and he'd go to spring training every year. He attended virtually every Dodger home game until his death in 1993. Roy Campanella was 36 when he had the accident that paralyzed him. He was 71 when he died, which means he spent almost exactly half his life in a wheelchair.
You never saw the chair when you saw Roy. You just didn't. You saw Campy.
All the years I saw him in that chair, I never, ever once heard him complain.
I'd like to thank Mr. O'Malley and all of my Dodger teammates. It's a wonderful tribute, and I thank God that I'm here living to be able to see it. Thanks a million.
That night for my dad was so special. Anytime he talked about it, you could see it in his eyes. His eyes just lit up for so many reasons. That evening meant the world to him, and he carried it in his heart for the rest of his life.
A World Series win and Hall of Fame election, that was all big stuff to Roy, big stuff. But when the fans in LA circled him in this night of honoring, recognition, and outpouring of affection, that had to be the biggest night in Roy's life. If Roy could speak to us right now, I think he would say that was the peak of his whole baseball life.
Is a special presentation of MLB Network Remembers with Bob Costas, the West Coast.
1968 was baseball's year of the pitcher. The examples most frequently cited are Bob Gibson's ERA of 1.12 and Denny McClain's 31 victories, the only pitcher to win 30 in the last 75 years. But there was another remarkable pitching performance that season that's sometimes overlooked. 1968 was also a presidential election year, and that's where our stories intersect. On June 4th, 1968, Robert Kennedy won the critical California primary, a victory that put him in position to win the Democratic nomination for president. Here is the first thing Kennedy said in his victory speech that night.
I want to first express my high regard to Don Drysdale. Who pitched his sixth straight shutout tonight. And I hope that we have as good fortune in our campaign.
A few miles from where Kennedy was speaking, the senator's friend Don Drysdale had just made baseball history, breaking a 64-year-old record by pitching his 6th consecutive shutout.
Don retired about a year later, so this was basically his swan song. This was his last shot at a certain kind of immortality.
The Dodgers weren't very good in 1968, so their fans put even more of their focus on Drysdale's streak. And it wasn't just about the record. It was also about the guy who was pursuing it.
The crowd definitely got involved because Don was a hero in LA. Don was very, very big in this city.
The Dodgers came to Los Angeles from Brooklyn in 1958, and Don Drysdale was one of their first big stars. And if Hollywood was looking for a baseball leading man, Don Drysdale seemed to come from central casting.
Don was Southern California. He was raised here. He was part of Hollywood. He was part, his mom and dad were raised here in Southern California. His dad grew up here.
Don went to Van Nuys High School with Robert Redford, Natalie Wood. He was superstar status.
He's 6'6", Hollywood good looks. He acted, he sang.
Do I look like a guy who would throw a spitball?
You look like two guys who would throw a spitball.
Drysdale was on TV a lot in those days. Beverly Hillbillies, Donna Reed, The Rifleman, and this classic bit of business from Leave It to Beaver.
Who? Beaver? Oh, yes, Beaver, yes.
Now, would you autograph my glove for me or something?
What kind of glove do you have? A worn spawn. Well, I'll autograph it anyway. Real nice talking to you boys.
We did it! We talked to Don Drysdale!
The connection with Los Angeles was based on more than just glamour and charisma. From the late 1950s to the mid-60s, Don Drysdale was among baseball's very best pitchers.
Drysdale is mobbed as he heads for the dugout.
The 23-year-old Drysdale won Game 3 of the 1959 World Series against the White Sox, helping the Dodgers win the Fall Classic in just their second year in L.A. 3 years later, Big D won the Cy Young Award with 25 victories to go with 232 strikeouts.
Don Drysdale has now struck out 9.
About that same time, Sandy Koufax began his run of pitching dominance, and together, Koufax and Drysdale became the game's most formidable pitching duo. Koufax intimidated batters with the brilliance of his stuff. Their fear of Drysdale had another aspect to it.
He was tough. When he got on that mound, boy, you look at it, somebody's going to hit the deck because that's the way he wanted it to be.
Being a base stealer, players like to pick on me, and being a little guy, they would beat me up pretty badly. And every time somebody fouled me, Don would come up to me immediately when I came back to the dugout. Do you think he meant to do that? I said, yeah. He said, well, I'll get him for you. He was kind of guy you were glad that he was on your team.
1966 proved to be the last of a great four-year run for Drysdale, Koufax, and the Dodgers. They won 3 pennants and 2 World Series. But Sandy Koufax retired after the '66 season, and the Dodgers proceeded to fall apart. So when Drysdale began his shutout streak in the spring of '68, the fans, and even his teammates, attached themselves to Big D.
We were going nowhere, so this is really all we had to play for.
The streak began on May 14th with a 1-0 shutout of the Cubs. 4 days later, Drysdale again won 1-0. Shutouts 3 and 4 followed. Then came the Giants at Dodger Stadium on May 31st. Through 8, Drysdale had another shutout going. But in the top of the 9th, San Francisco loaded the bases with nobody out.
And the count goes to 2-2 on Dick Dietz, who was a very good hitter. And then on the 2-2 pitch, Don hits him. He starts to go to first. Harry Wendelstedt, home plate umpire, says, you don't go. You made no attempt to get out of the way of the pitch. All the Giants are out on the field. Their coaching staff, manager, everybody. This is going on and on. The fans are into it.
20 minutes later, the pitch was ruled a ball, and Dietz eventually flied out. Then with 2 outs, Drysdale faced pinch hitter Jack Hyatt, who hit a pop-up directly over Wes Parker's head.
And I could hear Vince Scully in surround sound because there were so many transistor radios in the stadium saying he's 60 feet from the record. And I'm under the ball hearing this thinking, Wes, don't close your glove too soon, and I almost did.
Shutout number 5 was in the books. Drysdale's next start would be on June 4th against the Pirates at Dodger Stadium. He'd be looking to break the consecutive game shutout record set by Doc White in 1904. June 4th was also the date of the California presidential primary, an election so important that the favorite Robert Kennedy had said that if he did not win, he'd drop out of the race. Many of Kennedy's staff, including 24-year-old speechwriter Jeff Greenfield, were big baseball fans.
There was this awareness in the back of some of our minds that apart from the California primary, that Drysdale was going for this record of most consecutive shutouts.
That June 4th night against the Pirates, Drysdale was dominant again, and he went to the 9th with a 5-0 lead. With 2 out, ex-Dodger great Maury Wills singled, putting one of the most prolific base stealers of all time at first.
I can remember the moment right now. He threw over there about 4 consecutive times. All of a sudden, I realized how important it was to him, and I lost that competitiveness that you want to spoil it even if it's your brother. And I told the first baseman, I said, go tell him I'm not going to steal.
With Wills holding, the hitter was Willie Stargell.
The strike 1 pitch is a ground ball to Popovich. He has it to Parker.
Don Drysdale had his record-breaking 6th straight shutout. At roughly the same time, the networks declared the winner of the California Democratic primary.
Representative precincts indicate that Senator Kennedy is going to come out with a wide lead.
Local news, which was on even in the midst of this election story, reported that Drysdale had set this record. I said to Frank Mankiewicz, Robert Kennedy's press secretary, Drysdale just set the record. It might be a nice shout out for the senator when he gives his remarks to begin by congratulating Don Drysdale.
I want to first express my high regard to Don Drysdale.
Minutes after he finished his victory address, Robert Kennedy was shot. Later came this announcement.
Senator Robert Francis Kennedy died at 1:44 a.m. today, June 6, 1968.
Robert Kennedy's funeral was June 8th. That same night, Don Drysdale took the mound at Dodger Stadium wearing a black armband in honor of his friend Robert Kennedy. He needed 2 1/3 innings of shutout ball to break the great Walter Johnson's mark of 56 consecutive scoreless innings.
And from the pits of despair, we concentrate on a child's game, and particularly Don Drysdale's big night in baseball.
After 2 scoreless innings, Drysdale faced the Phillies' Roberto Pena, 1 out away from breaking Johnson's record.
The 1-2 pitch to Pena. Swung on a ground ball wide to third. It's Boyer who has the chance. He's done it.
Drysdale extended that streak to 58 2/3 scoreless innings before a Phillies sacrifice fly finally ended it. It would be the last great pitching performance of Drysdale's Hall of Fame career. The following year, an aching shoulder forced him to call it quits.
I'm Don Drysdale and happy that you've joined us tonight. Will there be game number 5? Well, we'll have to wait and see.
To no one's surprise, Drysdale became a broadcaster, and he was in the Dodger booth in 1988 when Oral Hershiser broke his scoreless innings record.
They call him the Bulldog here, and I think all of you have been able to witness that and see why, and at least we kept it in the family. That's the big thing.
Drysdale continued calling Dodger games for the next 5 years. Then, on July 3rd, 1993, Vin Scully came on the air with this.
Never have I ever had to been asked to make an announcement that hurts me as much as this one. Don Drysdale was found dead in his hotel room, a victim of a heart attack. To all the Drysdale family, our prayers for strength and our tears as well.
Don Drysdale was 56. 3 years ago, Ann Myers Drysdale and her children were invited to a special screening of Bobby, a movie about the night Robert Kennedy was killed. The film refers often to what Don Drysdale accomplished earlier that night.
No, it's not just a game, okay? Don Drysdale has pitched 5 consecutive shutouts. That's a record that has stood since 1904 by Doc White of the Chicago White Sox. He's gonna break it tonight, man. I know he is.
Well, it did affect me a lot, especially sharing it with my children, and they were still very young when Donnie passed away. The boys, DJ and Darren, were 5 and 3, and our daughter Drew was 3 months. You think about the history of Donnie's life, especially that night. We knew it was important for them to understand that their father was a part of this history.
It's Drysdale's night.
Tell me about it.
6 consecutive. He's gonna do it tonight. Not since 1904. 64 years.
Yeah. I know.
The incredible story that has become Don Drysdale. There is 1 out to go. The strike 1 pitch is a ground ball to Popovich. He has it to Parker. He's done it.
Is a special presentation of MLB Network Remembers with Bob Costas, the West Coast.
Fighting has always been a part of baseball, at least now and then. From Ty Cobb to the Gas House Gang to the brawls between the Yankees and the Red Sox in the 70s. Benches emptying, players mixing it up. But what happened in 1965 was something else. It included one of the most violent on-field acts in baseball history. It occurred in the heat of a close pennant race and came out of one of the most bitter rivalries in the game, a rivalry that had begun on the other side of the country a century ago.
Giants and Dodgers had the greatest rivalry in baseball. You could lose 20 straight, but don't lose to the Dodgers. Don't lose to the Giants.
When we go there, that was a war.
Even when I was in the minor leagues, we knew that we weren't supposed to like those guys.
Once you have that Dodger blue there, it's a hate.
It started when the two teams were in New York, the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers, 8 miles apart.
We played the Giants. It was 11 in Brooklyn and 11 over in Manhattan, so it was all here in New York. Made it for a heavy rivalry.
Big stars, contending teams, dramatic moments. And when the two teams moved to the West Coast, the passionate rivalry continued.
This started way back in Brooklyn, in New York, and it just escalated all out here.
I saw a lady at Dodger Stadium when we were playing the Giants, hitting a man over the head with the heel of his shoes because he was rooting for Willie Mays. That's how intense it was.
You got that feeling when the Dodgers are on town, we start getting tense because we know it's going to be, any minute it's going to be a fight.
And 44 years ago, the longtime rivals did in fact have a fight, or more precisely, a full-scale brawl.
It was ugly. You can't say a fight is a fight. That was a street fight.
And what started that street fight was an ugly and isolated moment in which a great player and a good man momentarily lost his mind.
It was a horrid act. Nothing like that ever happened in baseball before.
Somebody was ready to light the match. Marshall lit the match.
Here in this
is a special presentation of MLB Network Remembers with Bob Costas, the West Coast.
In the early to mid-'60s, the Dodgers and Giants had rosters dotted with future Hall of Famers. Marichal, McCovey, Mays, Drysdale, Koufax, and the teams were usually at or near the top of the National League. The summer of 1965 was no different. In mid-August, they were both within a game of first place in a tightly bunched pennant race as they headed for a big 4-game weekend series in San Francisco. All the games would of course be important, but everyone was especially looking forward to Sunday's rare matchup between the team's two aces.
We were waiting for Sunday because Sunday was Costas was going to pitch against Marichal.
The great left-hander Sandy Koufax against the Giants' 25-year-old Dominican right-hander with that distinctive delivery, Juan Marichal. It would be one of only 3 times the future Hall of Famers would pitch against each other. And the game would, in fact, turn out to be memorable, but not for the reason people thought. The opener of the series went to the Dodgers. They won 8-5 in 15 innings, thanks in part to a run-scoring single in the 15th by John Roseboro. Roseboro had been the Dodger catcher since the team moved to L.A.
And Roseboro makes a spectacular catch.
He'd taken over after Roy Campanella's career-ending car accident in 1958. An all-star with the Dodgers, Roseboro was known mostly for his defense and his toughness. That toughness was about to be severely tested. The next night, the Giants won 5-1 to even the series. In the 5th inning of that Friday game, with Maury Wills at bat, the chain of events began.
Maury Will went to the plate, and he faked a bunt.
The catcher came forward, just as I had hoped he would, and I took the pitch. When I took the pitch, I went back and I hit him in the mask. That's interference, obstruction. I was awarded first base.
The next inning, Matty Lou faked a bunt. He did exactly the same. He touched John Roseboro.
And the umpire did not give him the first base. We were mad because the umpire favored the Dodgers.
So now everything breaks loose. And Roseboro and Juan Marichal were mouthing off to one another.
That night, Marichal invited the Latin guys to eat at his house. In that conversation that night at the dinner table, I remember that they say, Cepeda, he's an instigator, Cepeda say, Juan, Roseboro is talking about you. And Juan said, why? But he was kidding. He said, you're talking too much in the bench, that he's going to shut your mouth tomorrow. Marichal got mad. He said, why he said that about me?
Marichal would have to wait a day to get the answer. On Saturday, the Dodgers won 6-4, and that set up Sunday's dramatic series finale. August 22nd, 1965, Koufax versus Marichal in front of a sold-out Candlestick Park. With anticipation in the air, Maury Wills stepped in against Marichal to lead off the game.
I said to myself, I'm going to pitch him inside. When he saw the ball coming, he had no way only to go down and on his back.
I was the leadoff hitter, the first pitch right here.
Now they start calling me names from the bench. So Ron Furley came up to the plate. I threw a pitch almost in the strike zone, but it was a ball, but you know, close to the strike zone. He went down.
So we said, okay, he wants to play that way, we'll do the same thing.
In the bottom of the third, the leadoff hitter was Marichal.
Roseboro asked Sandy to brush back Marichal in retaliation, and that wasn't Sandy's nature.
So when Juan came up, John Roseboro had this plan. Hey, Sandy, I tell you what, give me a curveball down low and inside. And when I throw it back to you, I'll get him.
So that's what we did with Marichal. It was all planned. We sat on the bench. We're going to buzz him.
He threw a ball from behind, so close, tipped my ear.
He said something like, "You better not hit me with that ball," and I started after him.
That's the last thing they talked. Roseboro went after, Marichal started clubbing him with the bat.
Anybody else, I believe, would have stayed on the ground. But John Roseboro was a tough individual. So he came back a second time and he got hit the second time. And I think that's when the blood came out.
And that's when the brawl began. Tito Fuentes, who was in the on-deck circle, rushed the mound with a bat in his hand.
I went with the bat because that's what I got in my hands. I went there to finish where Juan started. But I stopped for some reason because I looked at Roseboro and I saw blood coming out of his eyes.
They got me way down in the bottom, and the both team was on top of me. Somehow I managed to get out of there, and but it was a lot of punch throwing in that fight.
And I said to myself, you got to stop this. So now, how do you stop a riot? So I go right to Rosa, which is a good friend of mine, and I mashed his head, and all the blood started running down. And I said, Rosa, your eye is out. He said, what are you talking about? I said, your eye is out. So I put my hand over his eye, and blood was running all down his face. So we go to the dugout, and they brought a couple of towels out.
Now, who's going to hit Roseboro? Nobody can hit it because Willie Mays is there.
If I'd have went out there and started fighting, and Rosa was still there, we'd have still been fighting right now.
As Willie Mays was tending to Roseboro, Marichal was still hot as he tried to convince umpire Shag Crawford that Roseboro had buzzed him with the ball. Crawford was in no mood to listen. The pushing and shoving continued, and in the middle of it was the Dodgers left fielder, number 41, Lou Johnson.
John was my first friend. I lived 2 blocks from John, and when I saw the blood out of John's face, my mind just went off. I was swinging at everything, had on a white uniform. And had it not been for one of their players, I would still been in there. I would still been in there. It was that type of fight.
The brawl lasted a full 14 minutes. Even without the internet or cable television, news of the fight and what Marichal had done spread quickly.
Well, we have a bulletin from San Francisco on the message board now, and I quote, Juan Marichal hit John Roseboro on the head with a bat following knockdown pitches to Wills and Fairley. Roseboro left the field bleeding over the left eye. You think the Senate race isn't getting hot?
And here's Mike Wallace on the CBS News that night.
There are all sorts of conflicting versions on why it happened. Orlando Cepeda says Marichal told him that catcher Roseboro hit him in the ear with a ball when he threw it back to pitcher Koufax. Dodger manager Walter Alston says that's a lot of hogwash. Willie Mays says, quote, you saw what happened. At any rate, Roseboro is nursing a headache. Marichal faces an almost certain fine and suspension from the liveliest third inning baseball has had in quite a while.
This is a special presentation of MLB Network Remembers with Bob Costas, the West Coast.
Welcome back to MLB Network Remembers. As we've seen, on August 22nd, 1965, believing he had been provoked, the Giants' great pitcher Juan Marichal hit Dodger catcher John Roseboro over the head with his bat. A 14-minute brawl followed before order was restored. It was now August 23rd, and while Marichal waited to hear what his punishment would be, Roseboro talked for the first time about what had happened the day before.
John, first, you got a rather serious blow yesterday. How are you feeling now?
Well, I feel fine, Mel, and it's not quite as serious as they made it out to be. It's just a little scalp abrasion that bled a lot, that's all. In my opinion, it's all over. If anything has to come of it from me, then they can forget it, because there'll never be another incident between Marichal and I, unless he makes a mistake and starts something. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'll be there when it happens. But as far as being vindictive or anything like that, it's almost forgotten.
Thank you very much, John. I hope you've had a chance to talk with your family since this happened. I imagine they were concerned.
Well, my wife didn't like my head being bashed open too well, but she'll get over it.
The next day, the league ruled on what Marichal's punishment would be. He was suspended for 8 games, which was 2 starts in those days, and he was fined $1,750. Which might not seem like much today, but was at that time a National League record.
I'm sure there'll be no more bat wielding. I'm sure of that, because when you consider that $1,750 has to be paid out of your own pocket, and they have lost the services of a great pitcher for 2 terms.
I didn't think the fines and suspensions were adequate, because we were all in shock of what happened, and we thought it was a terrible incident, you know. And there was a national outcry that the Giants got off easy.
I was the one that got in trouble over that, because I thought the league president was kind of chicken, and I voiced that. The president was Warren Giles, and he didn't like that at all.
While the punishment may not have been severe enough for some people, the incident clearly affected Marichal's performance the rest of the '65 season. He was 19-9 before August 22nd. 3-4 after. His ERA was almost 2 runs higher. The Giants lost the pennant to the Dodgers that season by 1 game.
It did affect Juan down the stretch. You can make the claim that if he had won those games, the Giants would have been the champion.
Although Marichal remained a great pitcher throughout the 1960s, his reputation had taken a major hit. It didn't matter that those who saw him every day knew that Marichal's act of violence was completely out of character.
After what happened, I told the whole world how sad I was. I regret what I did.
It was out of character. He's a very gentle guy, soft-spoken. That's what made it more shocking, I think, that it wasn't the Juan we knew.
But to a lot of people, it became the Juan they knew. And not surprisingly, Marichal was public enemy number 1 to Dodger fans.
Oh, he got roundly booed. I mean, people were mad, and they were reminded about it in the paper every day, you know.
So imagine the reaction when 10 years after wielding that bat in Candlestick Park, Juan Marichal signed with the Dodgers.
The only reason I signed for the Dodgers, I went back to the Dodgers, was because I want people to know that I wasn't the type of person that want to hurt somebody over the head with a bat.
The reaction was predictably negative until an old Dodger stepped forward.
The first one that came out in public and told the Dodger fans to welcome me to Los Angeles was John Roseboro. So I really never gonna forget that.
It was the beginning of an unlikely friendship between the two. Marichal retired after only 2 games with the Dodgers, and a couple of years later, he met up with the long-retired Roseboro at an old-timers game. There, they discussed the incident at length for the first time and shook hands as they left. But while Roseboro had forgiven Marichal, many baseball writers apparently had not. His numbers should have made him a first-ballot Hall of Famer. But Marichal did not get in his first 2 years of eligibility.
I believe that incident prevent Juan to go into the Hall of Fame in the first try. The second try, he didn't make it.
I think that can be the only reason, because if you look, like you say, you look at the numbers, not too many pitchers have that kind of, numbers in 15 years of service.
John was angered. He was enraged, if you will, at the fact that Juan again had been denied that honor that he so well deserved.
Barbara Roseborough knew why her husband was so upset. He had told her what few others knew at the time, that Roseborough thought a good portion of the fault had been his.
He would tell the story that it was actually he who initiated that particular situation, and he took blame for it. So he came into my office and said, we must do something about this.
The plan was to have Roseborough's family make a public gesture of reconciliation with Marichal.
I invited him to my country to play in one Marichal Golf Classic. He was so nice of him to accept my invitation. He came to Dominican with his wife and daughter.
The media turned out in droves. That was a turning point in these kinds of observations and misunderstandings on the part of the public.
Went down to the Dominican Republic with him for his first golf tournament, met his family, my family and his family. We lived together in separate condos, same facility. Turned out to be a hell of a nice guy, not a fighter,
Roseborough, a beautiful person, because he know what they were doing to Juan. So he publicly say that he forgot the incident, the thing is over, and that Juan is a great person. So with those words, that was the seal for him to make it to the Hall of Fame.
High-kicking right-hander from Dominican Republic, one and only Juan Marichal.
Thank you. Thank you. The honor which is best owed on me today, I accept on behalf of my family, my country, Dominican Republic, and all the people who assisted me in making my baseball career a reality.
Overwhelming joy. Overwhelming joy. One would have thought John had received such an honor because that's how happy for one he was.
This is a special presentation of MLB Network Remembers with Bob Costas, the West Coast.
As the years went by, John Roseborough and Juan Marichal stayed in touch, even playing in old-timers games together in the late 80s. But in 2002, Roseborough, who had been in failing health for a while, suffered 2 strokes and was diagnosed with prostate cancer. Marichal would call often, asking how he was doing, and telling Roseborough he was praying for him.
Our family was quite moved at the extent to which he kept in touch and was there to be supportive during those many years during which John was ill. By John's reaction, it was pretty obvious. It was very, very moving to the point of tears.
On August 16, 2002, John Roseborough died. His wife Barbara asked Juan Marichal to speak at her husband's funeral.
Without question, Juan was among the first about whom we thought and who responded immediately.
And so, 37 years after standing on the field at Candlestick Park and essentially assaulting John Roseborough with a baseball bat, Juan Marichal stood and delivered the eulogy at Roseborough's funeral.
It was amazing, and yet it was not at all surprising, because these are 2 gentlemen, he and John, in my opinion, equally aware of all the circumstances under which this occurred and were classy enough to put it aside and move on.
In his eulogy, Marichal said that he wished he could have had John Roseborough as his catcher. He finished by telling the congregation that Roseboro forgiving him was one of the greatest things in his life.
Oh, I'm so happy that that happened, because I couldn't live with that in my heart.
Though he never won the Cy Young Award, Juan Marichal had 243 career victories and 244 lifetime complete games, including 30 in one season. His lifetime winning percentage was well above 600, and he was a 20-game winner 6 times. When you think about it, in all fairness, he was right there with exalted National League contemporaries like Bob Gibson and Sandy Koufax. These days, Marichal remains a revered figure in his native Dominican Republic and a welcome presence in baseball circles, including now the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. Johnny Roseboro was 69 at the time of his death. Soft-spoken and highly respected, he was a 4-time All-Star and an integral part of 3 Dodger World Championship teams. An insight into his nature comes from Tim McCarver. McCarver was just breaking in with the Cardinals when he was involved in a home plate collision with Roseboro. McCarver as the runner, Roseboro as the catcher. As McCarver recalls it, he was out by 10 feet, but Roseboro didn't just block the plate, he came up the line to meet him. The resulting collision was so violent that Leo DeRocher, then the Dodgers' third base coach, and a guy who had been around the game for decades and was renowned for his own take-no-prisoners style, said it was the toughest home plate collision he had ever seen. Roseboro was shaken. McCarver wound up with his face scraped and bloodied. The next time he came to the plate, Roseboro spoke to McCarver for the first time. As Johnny got down into his crouch and McCarver settled into his batting stance, Roseboro simply said, "You all right?"